Hey all, Jason Colyer, Support Operations Manager here. I'm joined by James and Caleb. Today we're going to go over the Zendesk Salesforce US Federal sync scripts, the code and how all that jazz works. So let me share my screen and we'll kind of get started. Right on. So right now what we're looking at is the V4 branch. Hasn't quite been merged into the main master branch yet, but this is the new version of the code. And yeah, right now we've got our README file. It kind of tells you like the required gems, which needs to be updated, the file tree path, and then the SOQL queries, which we'll go more over those when we actually go over the scripts. But the big meat and potatoes of how everything works, at least sync-wise, is the CI/CD script. Right now it's using Ruby 2.6. Later version, I'm going to update that to like 3 or whatever. But the stages we basically have are the gather, compare, sync, and then we're syncing users as well, because Federal actually does contact syncing. Much smaller pool of users and orgs were able to actually do that. There's like a future iteration where that won't be a thing, but we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there. We have a cast path with vendor Ruby. It's just to make the stages go a little faster between, because they don't need to re-download, every gem every time. They can just use the cache from the previous ones. Our before script is pretty simple. It's going to echo out, it's going to print out the Ruby version and then install bundler and then run bundle. Some people take different approaches. I like this approach just because it's consistent between scripts of, yeah, I'm pretty much always going to just install bundler and then run bundle, and then it'll have a gem file that will tell it what to actually install. We have this job that's the pre-sync ZD org report, which is me trying to shorten a potentially very long name. But essentially, this is a gather data stage. It's only running via schedule, and it's running the gather Zendesk organization script, which we'll go over in a bit. It's going to create an artifact that lasts 4 hours, and it is going to be named Zendesk orgs.json, not original naming, so that's just kind of what we go with. The pre-sync SF org report, or pre-sync Salesforce organization report, it's doing much the same thing. It's gathering Salesforce accounts. This one, however, creates two different artifacts. We've got the Salesforce accounts, which we'll actually be using for the sync. And then we have this account problems JSON, which we can download later. And this will tell us what problems are going to occur, what are being skipped in the sync. When we go over the actual Salesforce stuff, we'll kind of go over that. We got the ZD user report, which is doing the same thing, just gathering Zendesk users. Salesforce user report, again, same thing, just gathering Salesforce contacts. We have the pre-sync comparison for orgs, which is just going to compare them and create a creates and updates file to let the sync know this is what to create, this is what to update. I use needs here to basically say, I need these pre-sync ZD org report and pre-sync SF org report jobs to succeed. Without those, we can't proceed because it needs the artifacts they create. The user comparison, it's kind of the same thing, but for users. And then we have the sync organization and sync users job. These require the comparison report is completed, since it needs these create update files. And all this is going to do is run sync organizations or sync users. And that's what's actually going to update orgs or users in Zendesk or create them. Cool. So beyond that, here's our gem file right now. Not a lot here because we basically just need JSON, OJ, and RESTforce. Fun fact about that, you can click these and it'll actually take you to the Ruby gems, since that's the source. That's always like that feature in GitLab. But basically, because OJ is going to require Faraday, because that's how OJ works, I don't have to say I need Faraday because it's going to already be installed with OJ. But basically, when we run bundle, it's just going to install these gems. And JSON is a library. It's not. It's a gem, but also it's not a gem. It's weird. And then RESTforce is Salesforce's API gem. So our scripts here are pretty much how a lot of this is running. And I'll show you just one of them because they're all going to follow the same format. So like gather Zendesk orgs, it's going to require the ZD-SFDC sync US Federal file. And then it's just going to call Zendesk Salesforce sync US Federal, Zendesk gather organizations run. They're all going to follow this format. They're pretty much all going to be calling different libraries that we've built and doing the run function. So the more important stuff would be what's in lib. This is our main file. This is what we're actually requiring. And all this is declaring the module Zendesk Salesforce Sync US Federal. I really need to shorten that name somehow. And it's requiring bundler setup and then doing a bundler required default. This is fancy talk of, hey, so whatever I said I needed in the gem file, go ahead and tell the script that I require those gems so that they're already loaded and ready to go. And then from there, it's going to require the client file. So the client file, we'll go over that. Cool, so the client file, again, we declare our module and then we're making a class called client. It's gonna require the compare Salesforce and Zendesk files, which we'll go over in a bit. I set up a hash of retry options here, and basically we're gonna pass this into Faraday and it's gonna tell it how to handle failures. The most common failure being I timed out, I lost the socket, I dropped a packet. Nothing ruins a script more than I dropped a packet, so I stopped running completely. So this is just a way of saying, hey, do 5 max retries, wait a second between each one. There's an interval randomness of 0.5, which kind of it multiplies by the interval to kind of give it a range. So in this case, half a second to a second is what it's going to wait. The back off factor is 2. That's if it gets an error that tells it, hey, you've been API limited. Back off factor tells it, okay, wait this much time. Back off factor in this case is 2 seconds. I've never actually had to use that one in the scripting, but it's a good thing to put in place. And then we've got exceptions, and this is where it actually will use all this stuff. So exceptions for this would be connection failed, timeout. That's the exceptions it's actually looking for to use these retry options. Beyond that, we're making a Salesforce object. At Salesforce makes it kind of a global variable. If you've never seen this symbol before, double pipe equal, it's a really fancy Ruby term for set it to this, but if it's already set to something, don't do anything. It's a really good way to be able to call this function again without it retrying to make everything in the function. Instead, it'll just say, oh, you just want the Salesforce object. In this case, I'm calling the rest force and giving it all the required variables that it needs to actually generate a Salesforce connection. Zendesk, kind of the same thing, but instead of using a gem, I'm actually using Faraday. Haven't found a Zendesk API gem that I really like. There's a couple I've played with, they're okay, but they kind of fall short in some areas, especially on retries. That's where they really fall short on. So I ended up just going pure Faraday on this one. And for the Faraday connection, we're giving it the Zendesk Federal URL, the API URL, and then we're going to have it make sure the requests retry. It knows to use these retry options we have up here. The adapter is whatever the Faraday default adapter is for, the server, whatever it's running on. For headers, we set the content type to application JSON. This isn't required for GET requests to the Zendesk API, but any post or put request is absolutely going to require that, because it will only take JSON objects. And then we're using basic auth, which at some point in the future I will update because Faraday is now deprecating basic auth to use a different method. But for now, basically, I use my username or the Syncs username / token, and then the API token. And then here I have requests. This pairs with the Zendesk object, and it's basically calling the public send function, which is a nice wrapper for Faraday has a bunch of like request.get, request.post, request.put, request.delete. Instead of having to worry about that and remembering the exact right function to use, public send will instead take an HTTP method, the URL and parameters, and then just use it that way. So I can call, request get, google.com, and it'll do a get request in google.com instead of me having to remember, is it get or is it get send or whatever function. I like public send, it's a cool wrapper. But we're passing all that into a response, and then we're using OJ, which is a nice gem that will take an HTTP response and make it into a Ruby object so it's nice and easy to work with. In this case, I'm telling OJ to load the response body. So that's the client file. By itself, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's going to be calls to it that'll actually do something. So we'll go with Salesforce as a starting point. We have the Salesforce RB, which you saw the client file require. All this is doing is requiring the gather script. And that's just so I could kind of separate stuff out. So if I go into Salesforce, here's the gather script. All this is doing is requiring accounts and contacts. I like to do it this way just to make it a little easier to read. I mean, you could put all of this in one file, but it gets kind of hard to read after a while. So the accounts, we've got our module, our Salesforce class, our gather class, and then our accounts class. And I'm telling it to inherit from client. The reason for this is I don't want to have to call Zendesk Salesforce Sync US Federal : client dot Salesforce every time I need to call Salesforce. By doing it this way, I'm basically telling it, just inherit from it, know that Salesforce means the one from the client. Here's our run function, which is what our scripts, our bin scripts actually use, but you can see how it's doing gather, verify, report, and artifacts. Gather is essentially just going to print out that it's gathering the data. It's going to call the data function and then say it's done. The data function, see how I've got a variable data that I'm setting as a global with the @sign using this double pipe equal. And then I'm using the Salesforce gem to run a query, and it's using a query string. And then I'm taking the results and mapping them to account objects. So the query string, this is our query string for accounts. If you're not familiar with SQL or SOQL, which is the Salesforce Object Query Language, basically what we're doing here is I'm telling it what I want. So in this case, I'm saying, yeah, I want the account ID 18C, which is fancy API talk for the 18-digit account ID. And then I want the name, and I want car this account C, which is the API for the ARR for the entire account instead of just specific subscriptions, which is what we use in our syncs. Ultimate parent sales segment employee C, which is really fancy for what's the market segmentation, large SMB, PubSec. Account owner calc C, that's in Salesforce, account owner is an object, and calc C is basically a fancy way of saying, right, so just calculate the account object and give the account owner and give me that person. This is going to end up returning a string that will then sync over. Number of licenses, the number of seats in their licenses, their total licenses, the type of account, which would be like customer, former customer, prospect, all that fun stuff. Technical account manager name, which is the name of the TAM. Support level is the support level. That's determined based on subscriptions, but we actually have this script doing a little morph with it. We'll go over that in a bit. Region, which we actually don't use in US Federal, but I wanted them kind of in sync with what the other scripts are doing, so I called it anyway. GS health score color, which is the Gainsight health score color. I don't understand fully how this health score is determined, but my understanding is Gainsight is using a bunch of information about like potential to renew, emotional state, stuff like, or not emotional state, but like health state of the account, stuff like that, to determine a red, yellow, green color system, or null, which means it hasn't calculated anything. Some people find that useful, so we do sync it over. Next renewal date is going to look at their subscriptions and look at the next upcoming renewal and put that there. Solutions architect lookup dot name. Basically, I'm saying do account solutions architect lookup on the account and then give me the name of the person, which we'll call down below. This is one of the newer parts of it right here. I'm calling a subquery, and I'm basically doing, I want the current subscription status, the end date, the start date, and the plan name from the subscriptions that are active for the accounts that we're pulling. This will allow us in the script later to actually look at the subscriptions and then ensure that the support level matches what it should be. It'll also allow us to add tags in case we have customers who are, I'm ultimate and gold and bronze and starter. I've got all these plans, but we want all those tags present. And then as we work tickets, we can remove the ones not applicable. So we're asking for all of that from the accounts table, or accounts object, I should say, since SOQL's objects. And then we've got our where statement, which is basically us being specific for US Federal. So we only want customer, former customer, prospect. Yeah, I know that's kind of everything. It's everything but leads. The account territory should start with US Pub Fed, percentage sign is a glob, just like in SQL. Glob being fancy term for a wildcard. And then we're doing we're basically doing this right here, which is using the plan. So if their support level is premium, ultimate, or expired, they're good, we want them. If they're basic, we also require that their number of licenses is equal to or over 2,000. So this kind of huge query here is basically just saying, yeah, give us all the US Federal accounts. That's the summary of what this says. So the Salesforce is going to run that query and then map it into an account object, which down here you'll see this is just turning all of those into a giant hash that will be passed along into an array. And basically what you're seeing here is I've got some stuff like type is downcased, and then I want it to take any spaces and make them underscores. That way it follows camel casing. For health score, I want it to a string and downcased. To a string is nice because if it's null, it'll make it an empty string. So it doesn't error out. It's just a kind of nice way to do that. But you can see how some of these we have this check account function that starts first. So check account is one of the newer stuff. I've got this plan called 9 expired. They all have numbers for a reason. It's just for sorting of what plan is the most important. But basically, we're going to go through the account subscriptions. If you're not familiar with this right here, the was it ampersand.each? It's a really nice way of, if the subscriptions were null and I called it .each, it's going to say I can't iterate on a null. It should have been an empty array. I don't know what to do. I'm going to error out, et cetera, et cetera. Ampersand's basically saying if it exists and each. So it's a nice little trick just so you don't have to add a function in, add a call in there that's like, return blah if subscription is null, or nil, I should say. So it's a nice little trick that I've picked up along the way. From there, I've got kind of a redundant line here that says, skip it if the subscription status isn't active. The reason that's redundant is I already said only pull ones where it's active. But, it's there. I don't know. I'll remove it at some point. If the current end date is nil, we just want to skip the subscription because that basically means it's an invalid end date. If something's wrong with it, we don't want to parse that. If the date parse of the end date is less than today, that means they're expired. So we're going to go ahead and just skip the iteration. Otherwise, we're going to determine plan and push that to our plans array up here. And all determined plans is we've got 1 ultimate, 2 premium, 3 starter, 3 starter. And this is basically just doing a little regex on the name of the plan. So ultimate becomes ultimate, premium becomes premium, starter is starter, and basic is also starter. The numeric values will come into play up here. We've also got 8 custom. That's just an else statement, basically. If it didn't match any of these, just call it custom. It's going to look, that way we know something's up. But basically, if the plans are greater than 1, meaning we've added something other than this 9 expired, we're going to delete expired. That means they have some kind of plan. From there, we're going to do a sort and map. And this right here, this 1 ... -1 is a really fancy way of saying, yeah, give me the string minus the first character. So basically, ultimate or 1 ultimate becomes ultimate, 2 premium becomes premium. And I'm calling it unique. That's if they have like 5 silver subscriptions, we obviously don't want silver, 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 silver. We just want 1 silver because, beyond that, I say I want the minimum plan. And that's 1. That's why these have these numbers, just for sake of sorting of 1, 2, 3, 8, 9. If you're wondering why it skips from 3 to 8 to 9, Global has more plans and had to account for things like community and silver and bronze and gold. But basically all this is the entire point of this check account is to set our subscriptions and set the support level to what it actually should be, the highest supported plan that they have. And from there, we're going to pass it into the account object. So beyond that, we got this verified data, which in our case, just checks for duplicates. That's the only thing we actually have to check for. We can sync the rest of it just as is. And all that's going to do is duplicates. Up here, I've got this where duplicates is equal to determine duplicates. Okay, so all I'm doing is taking the data and I'm grouping it by the name and I'm downcasing it because Zendesk cares about names regardless of case. So we want all the names in downcase so we can compare them. And then I just want the values. What this is basically going to do is give me a whole bunch of account objects. That's what it's going to do, but it's going to group them in arrays based on their name. And then from there, I want to select any of this grouped value where the size is greater than 1, and I want to flatten it, which is basically going to say, move it out of an array. Because select's going to put it in arrays, and then I want to take it out of that and just have that. So what this basically is doing is if you have 2 accounts with the same name, they're going to be listed in this duplicates, and then from there, You can see how we do minus equals. So I'm removing all duplicates from the data because we can't sync duplicates. There's no way for the script to know, well, which duplicate's the right one. So we just remove them and report on them. From there, we've got a report which will tell us, hey, I located this many. Here's the duplicates, and then it'll also iterate and tell us each of the names of the duplicates. And it's going to create our Salesforce accounts and SFDC account problems JSON artifact files. So I know that was a lot. Any questions before I proceed? Right on. So the other gather script for Salesforce is contacts. You'll see this looks a lot like the other one. Our run gathers, it generates, and it reports. A lot of this is really the same. We've got, determining duplicates. The only addition here is the missing values, because if they're missing an email or a name, we obviously can't sync them. We don't, those are required fields in Zendesk. But it's basically just going to do the same thing. Here's our SQL query. You'll notice the where statement, pretty much the exact same with the addition of if it's an inactive contact, we don't want that. So this is kind of a weird statement, but inactive content is false, which would make them inactive contact, sorry.
Hey, Jason, sorry, one minute here. When you asked for questions, I hadn't seen that Artie had posted something in chat. Artie, do you mind vocalizing for the recording?
Oh, yeah, no, I think Jason kind of answered this question when he was talking through it already, but it was just to do with the way that the plan is set, like for the tagging for the different plans. And I assume that the reason why there's only the 3 plans like Ultimate, Premium, and Starter is because this is US Fed, and then Global has all of them.
Correct. Yeah. Global also has bronze, silver, gold, community. So it does have a couple others. That's why it goes from 1, 2, 3 to 8. Like it's literally because this is kind of a mirror copy of what we have in global, which I think does like 1 ultimate, 2 golds, 3 premium, 4 silver, something like that. I don't remember the exact numerical, the exact order of it, but yeah, it has like community. I think it has like EDU, OSS. It has a couple different plans that we have to account for.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so you'll notice the contact sync, the contact gather is pretty much the exact same thing, other than we're gathering contacts instead of organizations. Our contact object is considerably simpler because all we really need to know is name, email, org, and we're going to use this Salesforce ID just for sake of data checking later. So it's there, but you'll notice here, like if the name is nil or the name is blank or the email is nil or the email is blank, it's basically adding these to a missing array. That way it can kind of subtract them from our contacts to say, I can't sync someone without a name. I can't sync someone without an email. Duplicates, same thing. We can't sync 2 different, 2 of the same email to 2 different users. Cool. So that's the Salesforce portion of the sync script. The Zendesk function, the Zendesk portion, yeah, it's going to look kind of like the Salesforce function, Salesforce stuff to begin with. It's going to call gather. It also has sync, which we'll go over in a bit. We'll focus on gather. Okay, cool. So organizations, Zendesk, Salesforce, Sync, US Federal, class Zendesk, class gather, class organization, inherit from client. That's just so we can call the requests really quickly without having to type out a ton of space. What this does is just generate the artifact and report. Probably could have made a function called gather, or probably could have put like a gather function here, but I just didn't for this one. Data is gather orgs. Gather orgs is going to basically say I'm gathering the organizations. It's going to set an empty array, have next page set to 1. And we're going to do what might be like nails on a chalkboard to some programmers, but basically I'm going to iterate over pagination using Faraday requests. I have not found a better way to do this in Zendesk yet. I always look forward to finding a better way, but right now the most they'll return is 100 results a page. So the second you're over 100 organizations, surprised we are for every instance, you're going to have to start doing pagination. So basically, this is going to print a dot for each page. This is just so when I review scripts, I can see how many pages it had to go through. It's going to make a GET request to organizations JSON, setting the page to whatever next page is. So start with one. It'll add the organizations to our orgs array up here. It's going to make sure to map them into org objects. We'll go over that in a second. If the next page is blank in the response, like it doesn't have a value, that means we're done paginating. We can just break out of it. Otherwise, we need to add one and go to the next page. After that, it puts out done and returns the organizations. So the org object, you'll notice this looks a lot like what Salesforce had. That's because we're going to compare them in the compare script. So it helps to have them look almost the exact same. There is a slight difference in that there is the tags. We're pulling tags from this because we want to make sure the tags that we want to make sure we add all the tags that we need for them. We also make sure to check the support level and determine the subscription. So for support level, basically, I'm just checking to, if it says it's basic, I want to say it's starter, because basic's an old term. We don't use that. Starter is the correct term. Otherwise, just return the support level that it has in Zendesk. For the subscriptions, I've got an allowed, the one for global, way longer because it has a lot more different things to check for. But in the case of, the US Federal, we got starter, premium, ultimate, community, and custom. And community actually doesn't belong there. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt that it's there, but there's no community in Federal. But basically, we're going to duplicate the tags. I just using org tags dupe or dup, however you want to pronounce that. I've always pronounced it dupe since it stands for duplicate. And then we're going to set that to subscriptions, and then we're going to only select from the tags the ones in this and these select allowed tags, these plans. If it didn't find any, it's going to return expired because they don't have any plan tags. That means they're expired. And then it's going to return subscriptions if it's gotten that far. What this is going to do is basically duplicate all that subscription checking we did in the Salesforce stuff. And then clean tags, this is literally just cleaning up the tags so that we don't have a bunch of duplicates and we don't have the starter, we don't have these plan tags in there since those will be added in later. But that's pretty much all there is to gathering Zendesk organizations, and surprise, users is kind of the same stuff. There we go. Gathering users, it's going to paginate over. The only difference here is we're using the users endpoint. I'm including organizations. This means I'm sideloading the organizations, because otherwise what I get is an organization ID, which is not as useful to me, since what I have to pass to Zendesk to create or update a user is not the ID. I need the name of the organization. So what I do is sideload organizations. And this will basically give me my object will be like users and then organizations. And I can just cross-reference between the two. So I have the name. I don't have to make two different API requests for it. I instead just have one. I only want end users. Like we don't need to sync users or, agents. And then page, next page. It's kind of doing the same stuff we saw before. We're taking the user object. We want the U, and we want all the organizations passed in each user object function. This is so we can easily cross-reference them. And it'll do that until the pages, there are no more pages, and then return the users. So the user objects, we're going to detect from the orgs where the user, the organization ID equals the user's organization ID. That'll give us the org. And then down here, we can call, if the org is nil, just make it empty. They're not associated. It's not going to happen very often since they would have to be associated to have been detected anyway. But and then the org name will be returned if it exists. Salesforce ID is kind of the same thing of like, if there's not an org, it's going to be blank. Otherwise, pass the organization's custom organization field Salesforce ID. Cool. So the next part would be gather, or compare. But before I go over that, any questions so far? Cool. Then I'll go over the compare again. Like these RB files that are in the parent folder here, they don't do a lot other than just require the actual individual files. But we've got compare and organizations. Cool. So we have our modules and Salesforce Sync US Federal. That's the last time I'm going to read that entire thing out. Then we have our compare class and our organizations class, and we've got our run, which is going to do compare, generate artifacts, and report. So we're setting some variables here just for sake of referencing them later. It's good for creating the artifacts. It's good for doing quick counts. But our actual compare is going to determine our sync needs. It's going to go over each of the accounts, which are defined way down here. Should have put that up the top, but that's basically the Salesforce accounts from our previous artifact file. And it's going to go over each with index. Each with index is useful for basically just printing out this nice, pretty formatted string so we can see what count it is on. That's really not needed other than that, but I like it. So yeah, but all this print format doing is it'll print out a count of what account number it's on, so that we can quickly, when we're running the script, see like, oh, I'm on 5 of 5,000. I'm on 2,800 of 92,000. It's nice to see how long it's running. It's nice to see where it's at. It's also really nice if something errors and breaks the script, because I have a nice count of where it stopped. But beyond that, we're going to look in the organizations, which again, it's defined down here, but it's the Zendesk organizations. And we're doing a detect to look for a matching Salesforce ID, since that value is only going to be present in one organization, or should only be present in one organization. That's a good thing to look for. If it's not in Zendesk, which would mean that ZD is nil, we know that we need to create an organization. So we're going to push it to create using a create object. Otherwise, we need to determine if updates are needed, which is, we got A and ZD, the account in the Zendesk object, and then we'll print done. If you're not familiar with /R, it's returned, so it puts the cursor all the way back to the beginning of the line, which is useful when I'm printing out this stuff and just overwriting numbers and stuff like that. So we'll look at the create object real quick. This is a create object. You'll notice this looks different than the objects we had in previous scripts. That's because this is specifically what Zendesk wants it to look like when you pass it to it. It's for a non-existent org. It wants a name, and then organization fields, which are our custom fields that we've made into Zendesk. And Salesforce ID, SFDC, short ID, support level, ARR, market segment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then tags, we're basically getting the subscriptions and just sorting them. That's it. Because the rest of these, like market segment or support level or account type, those are dropdowns. They'll add their own tags automatically to Zendesk. So we don't actually have to worry about that. We just have to make sure we add those subscription tags. That way, if their support level is ultimate, but they also have premium and starter, they will get ultimate, premium, and starter tags in their organization. Now, the determine update function, that's what we got here. We've got a comparable object, which is a very fancy way of saying I don't need to compare an ID or the tags. Those are custom only to Zendesk. I do not need to compare those to Salesforce. It's making sure to sort the subscriptions and make sure the health score is in string format. This is just to make sure that when it compares, it doesn't be like, well, it said premium ultimate starter, but Zendesk said starter premium ultimate. If it does that, it's going to be like, these aren't the same thing. They mostly are. But yeah, so basically it's just going to duplicate the org and remove those and pretty up the object so that we can actually compare it, which is as easy as, is the account equal to the Zendesk object? Are they the same thing? Well, if they are, then we're going to push it to do nothing just for sake of counting and reporting. Otherwise, we're going to push the update object, which looks very similar to the create object, other than it has an ID. Beyond that, update tag list, which you can see here, all that's doing is making sure to add the subscriptions, making sure to sort them and unique them, and then pass them back. Then we generate the file. Report is, orgs create, sync, and good standing. That's where do nothing comes into play. It's just, this is how many orgs are good. Not necessary. I like it though, just so I can quickly look and make sure the sync is working. it's good to see the sync run, and then on the next run, see that number go up. Like we want to see the do nothing count go up and up and up. Yeah, so the other compare is the users. Unsurprisingly, it's going to look very, very similar. Other than the create and update objects are going to be different. Like that's as simple as they are. They're not complex. They don't have to do tags or subscriptions. They're just users. They're a lot easier to deal with. So any questions on compare before I go to sync? Cool. So sync's our last portion of this, which is basically us taking that creates and those updates files and passing them to Zendesk to actually do it. We have these nice little objects here that create update and errors. They're just nice placeholders while we add stuff to them. Creates is, here, I think I probably defined them at the bottom. Yeah, I need to stop doing that, but creates is the creates file, updates is the updates file. For the creates, I'm going to do each with index. That's just for sake of reporting. Create org is just going to create a post request to the organizations using a create object, which I then take the object we had before and really put it into the object that Zendesk wants, because they want it in the format of organization and then all your fields and then organization fields and all that. I do it this way because Zendesk has occasionally changed how they want those objects to look. And it is really annoying to have to figure out to have to go back to compare and then go back to other. It's a lot easier just to take what we already have and at this end stage say, just put it in this format. That's what they want. After that, it'll create the org. The sync orgs, which I should probably rename to update orgs. It's badly named. We're doing something a little different. You'll notice I'm doing it each slice 100. That's really fancy way of saying, take my giant array and make it into smaller arrays that have a size of 100. Basically from there, we're going to map them into update objects, which you can see up here. We're then going to take the requests and put them, and you'll notice that the actual sync object I'm using is organizations, and then a bunch of these update objects. And then it's putting that to JSON and sending it to the update mini. The reason for this is if we have to update 100 orgs, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it takes 100 API requests. Update mini takes 1. It creates a job, which we'll have the job status for, and the job processes way quicker than the API does. I don't know why. It just does. We don't do that for creates solely because I've not seen a case where I had to create more than like 10 orgs. As long as the script stays update and everything's good to go, it really doesn't have that situation. And then at the end, it's going to report, here's what I created, here's what I synced. If there were any errors during these scripts, which you can kind of see here, if there's the handle error during the create org, if there was a response error, it'll print out all the various errors, which most of the time is name blah already exists. I've never seen it send out anything else because our sync script has so much data checking in it that it's prevented every other possible error. But I've absolutely seen name already exists, and then that's normally when ops has to go investigate what's going on. And the create the sync users is the exact same thing. It's just using specifically the user create many, and all that fun stuff. There's not a whole lot of difference on this one either. Like you can see how it's still doing the each slice. It's doing a user's update many. The only difference is these objects are way smaller and a lot easier to manage. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that. So any questions on the sync portion or any part of the script? Cool. Looks like we're in a good place. So yeah, that's the basics of the Zendesk Salesforce US Federal Sync, which I said it again, so I lied earlier. I guess I had to say it one more time. But that's the basics of it. The code, it lives in the ops instance. That's because the pipelines, they're going to show customer data. It's private and protected. We can't have that available to everybody. So unfortunately, we have to have it in a private instance. But we do have our training and our documentation, all that fun stuff that is publicly available for you to look at, this video as well. You can always feel free to come in to support ops and ask us questions. You can always feel free to schedule like a coffee chat with me if you want to go over it or understand, or if you have ideas to improve it. But yeah, with that, I hope you found this educational. I look forward to seeing you in the future.